another thing that Joe Blackburn touched on in that article was about new enemies, and he said about, people are always asking about, will there be a new enemy race or a whole new enemy type, and he said, which I think I disagree with him, but he said that it wouldn't be interesting, and that pretty much their way of doing that is by adding new types of enemies like the Wyverns and the Hive Guardians, Tormentors, and then now the Subjugators. That's their way of adding a new enemy type. But he said pretty much that it wouldn't be that interesting. And he said that it pretty much wouldn't be as exciting as players think it would be to add a new enemy. But I know, I disagree. I think just having a whole new enemy would be... I think, I don't know whether he genuinely believes that or whether it's just kind of like from a logistical game standpoint of retention numbers, it wouldn't be that much of a draw. But I think it would add a lot more hype simply seeing, again, I'm not saying they should because it would be a huge undertaking, but if there was just a brand new enemy type, I do think that would be a lot more interesting than he kind of said in the interview. What do you think about that?
Okay, so I don't want to speculate about the perspective that Joe's coming at that from, whether it is based on his opinion or whether it's based on logistics. I imagine that there definitely is a logistics side of it, which is very tricky to manage. What I would definitely say, though, is that when you actually go ahead and take a look at the game and the enemies that have been added over the years, Tormentors and Subjugators and Hive Guardians for that matter, they're big ticket encounters, right? And that means that you have the ability to... Wyverns too, for that matter, because they were added in Beyond Light.
That was what you mentioned, yeah.
Yeah, they define a encounter space, right? They are a big thing. They're a big piece upon which most of the other stuff rotates, right? Like, if you see a Wyvern coming at you in a Grandmaster Nightfall, that is your number one priority. It's over the boss, it's over any of the ads, it's over champions often, because it will storm you slowly but surely, and it will beat you if you don't deal with it properly.
Very annoying.
So, if you take one enemy and have just one really well-designed combatant, I get that. Like, I can kind of understand where he's coming from on that side of things, but I think I think this is where it becomes more of a logistics thing, because I'd love to see not the whole, this is a encounter-defining thing, but I'd love to see something where we do get a new enemy faction, I'll call it, because, yeah, I think that's the correct term. Because, it's not just about having interesting and dynamic fights, it's also about novelty. Like, I don't doubt that the combatant team is going to be able to make some interesting fights with a new kind of combatant, or a new faction worth of combatants even, like they've proven they can make dynamic enemies that change the way that you fight and change the way that you approach PvE situations. That's nothing new. We see that is entirely possible, and we see that will be something we need to deal with in the future. I would, however, I think that's even more of a reason for them to make a new faction, though, because, you don't need to apply all of that learning to every single enemy. Like, you don't need a whole faction worth of Hive Guardian level type enemies, but, I think there is a deeper understanding of what players are capable of. I think there's a deeper understanding of what the combatant designers at Bungie can do, and I'd love to see them apply those lessons to a load of different combatants, Like, the last time we got combatants, we got the Scorn, and I know they're not everybody's favorite enemy faction to fight, but personally, I think that they present a really interesting combat challenge, and I think that they have presented some of the more interesting mechanics to work around. Whether that's chieftains and their totems, or whether it's just how bull rushy they are compared to a lot of the other enemy factions you fight. Screebs, mini Screebs for that matter, like, there's a lot of stuff in terms of like the Scorn kit and arsenal that is interesting, and I think is worth building out. And, there's a reason I think why Overload champions are so interesting to fight for the Scorn, because it can be any three of those totems that you fight, and each of them is the amped up version, and it makes your Overload interaction with them that much more sort of important. Either way, maybe this is just the opinion of one person. I imagine there's someone in the comments who absolutely hates the Scorn and isn't buying a damn thing of this, but the point is, they've learned a lot since Forsaken. I would love to see them apply all the stuff they've learned from making these new combatants to an entire new enemy faction, Create the most interesting versions of enemies that you can that do fill those roles, even if some of those roles are chaff, I want to see them make a new faction. I much as I know that it's it's probably Joe's perspective, and he absolutely knows more about game design because he has the big overview of the studio. It still doesn't change the fact that as a player, I would love to see a new enemy faction.
Yeah.
You know?
And I think with that, it's something you see a lot with Bungie's communications recently, is they talk a lot about pretty much like how they talk about the pretty much return on investment. Like, is this worth the resources? Because as we know, Bungie they have a lot of developers, but clearly most of them aren't working on Destiny. There definitely aren't as many working on Destiny as they used to. So, and that's been definitely kind of I think it's taken a bit of adjustment for, I think, a lot of players, because Bungie definitely, in the players' defense, Bungie were not very transparent about how much they were shifting their developers towards other games. So, like, and we'll probably talk about it later, but the PvP is a classic example. PvP